If Walls Could Talk, the movie. Though in this case, they can talk, 'cause we're the wall. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainly Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about the 2024 single location drama, Here. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All of my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Here stars Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, and Paul Bettany, and was directed by Robert Zemeckis. Based on Richard Maguire's 2014 graphic novel of the same name, it tells the generation-spanning story of one singular location. Despite their relative novelty, movie gimmicks are nothing new. Since the beginning of film, they've been an effective way to periodically rejuvenate the medium and entice people to watch. Less than 100 years ago, synchronized sound was considered a gimmick. Since then, we've had all manner of other gimmicks. 3D, Sensurround, flying skeletons in the theater, multiple theatrical endings, movies presented in reverse. Even today, we get gimmick movies every few years. First-person point-of-view movies, simulated single-take films, movies filmed over the course of an entire decade. Robert Zemeckis is no stranger to tech-based movie gimmickry. Who Framed Roger Rabbit merged animation and live action. Forrest Gump seamlessly inserted Tom Hanks into archival footage. The Polar Express pioneered a new form of motion capture technology for its animation. Here is Zemeckis' latest tech experiment, and perhaps the most gimmicky of all. Shot using a static camera, we witness the events of a single location, from prehistoric times to today, with most of the story taking place during the last 100 years, within the living room of a house. That unmoving, static camera angle provides the basis for this time and era-jumping story, showcasing the cyclical nature of life and the unceasing passage of time. The fixed camera may be the core of the gimmick, but the film's unique structure has a big hand in its presentation too. This is a non-linear story that quite literally spans 66 million years. Ambitious, to say the least. The film features a brief prehistoric sequence at the beginning, which is silly and unnecessary, but the rest of the film is split into half a dozen human time periods. 2 of these occur before the story's central house is even built, focusing on a pre-colonial Native American family, and later the colonial-era estate of Benjamin Franklin's son. Once the house is built, we watch the lives of 4 different families across roughly 100 years. The Harder family in the late 1910s, an inventor and his wife in the late 30s and early 40s, multiple generations of the Young family from 1945 to 2003, and then the Harris family in the late 2010s and early 2020s. Interestingly, no on-screen dates are ever provided, which admittedly initially makes for a slightly disorienting watch, as each time period is established. Context clues are all we have to go on. References to various wars or diseases, changes to furniture, clothing, technology, and music, and even the occurrence of recognizable events, like the Beatles appearing on The Ed Sullivan Show. As I mentioned before, this is a non-linear story, jumping randomly among the time periods, and even skipping through time within a single period. It's a structural style that you do get a handle on eventually, but I'm not sure it worked as well as the filmmakers hoped it would. A linear structure probably would have been more effective in this case, but even the non-linear structure could have worked had it been less chaotic and with a more natural, coherent flow. As it stands, there are very few time transitions that have any sort of thematic or tonal flow. There was one time jump involving a water leak, and another showcasing the moon that I think really worked, but most of the hundreds of other time jumps just felt random. It gives the film this chaotically jumbled up quality that lessens the impact of the story and makes it really hard to care about any of the characters, except for perhaps members of the Young family. But that's only because we get 60 years with them. I mentioned it before, but Robert Zemeckis employing techie gimmicks in his films is nothing new. He's often been at or near the forefront of cinematic technological advancements, but he may have finally reached the end of that here. Despite being a series of fairly ordinary family dramas, this is a very visual effects heavy film. And on the whole, I think those visual effects are on the poor side. With its constant time jumping, this film obviously needed a way to visually transition from one time to the next. There were a lot of cool possibilities, but the static camera definitely limited the options here. Even so, the transition style that was utilized is just so odd. In what I can only assume is an allusion to the story's graphic novel origins, the film employs a rectangular frame panel window style to stepwise dissolve into another time period. It probably sounded good on paper, but it has a real low-budget iMovie collage transition feel to it. There are certainly some transitions that work better than others, but most are overly busy, in a way that probably worked as a static image on the page of a book, but not so much as a moving image on the screen. In addition to the visual effects used for transitions, this movie also makes extensive use of CG images and alterations. The prehistoric portion of this film, however brief, was a misstep for many reasons, but perhaps the biggest was its outdated and comparatively poor CGI. In fact, all of the time periods prior to the existence of the house have this very distracting sheen of visual artificiality to them, which makes sense because they are artificial. Speaking of artificial, we've got to talk about the de-aging here. The story spans over 100 years, 60 of which with a single family, so there are characters who age. Old age makeup is one thing, but this movie required the reverse, as actors in their 60s had to play the 18-year-old counterparts of their characters. This was done using generative AI, which is disappointing to begin with, but the results are a little uncanny. I mean, we're not talking Polar Express depths of this uncanny valley, but still, the glossy, almost there look may be good enough for some audiences, but the extensive use of de-aging was a bit distractingly unconvincing for me. Robert Zemeckis may be known for his love of technical gimmickry, but his films are also often known for their sentimentality. His movies are frequently about the good old days, and the not so good old days, but with a blanket of golden warmth. There's always a syrupy, nostalgically rose tint to his stories. Obviously, a movie focusing on multiple generations of families is right up his alley, and so that quality is taken to the extreme here. It does work if you're in a certain nostalgically oriented mood or mindset, but this is a very corny film at times. It's sickly saccharine, it's schmaltzy, it's full of eye-rolling dialogue and overdramatic line readings. In a way, it's almost a throwback to Frank Capra Capricorn of the 30s and 40s, but without the impact or earnestness. Bizarrely, this film feels very much like a stage play. The fixed camera, the overacting and corny line delivery, the artificiality of it all. Really, this is probably more akin to a dramatic cinematic version of Disney's Carousel of Progress. It's a movie about the fleeting nature of time and the snippets of moments that make up a person's life, the problems that change, and the things that stay the same from one generation to the next. It's a story of little moments, but it's a film where the culmination of those moments is the main point. Unfortunately, that cumulative whole doesn't manage to be much better than the sum of its numerous and chaotically organized parts. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The biggest pro is the premise. It may come across as fairly gimmicky, but the idea of observing the events and inhabitants of a single fixed location over more than 100 years is undeniably intriguing. The prehistoric element of this felt unnecessary, but once humans come into the picture, and especially once the house is built, this premise offers the potential to explore existential and philosophical humanistic themes in a really novel way. At times, the promise of this premise does shine through, but it's not capitalized on effectively enough to live up to its grand potential. On the con side, the biggest issue is the structure. So I'm somebody who really does appreciate uniquely structured films. Movies that play around with time or present their stories non-linearly can often be extremely interesting. Unfortunately, I think Here really fumbled its use of nonlinear structure. With a story about the cyclical nature of life and family and human trends that endure across generations, it seemed primed to tell its parallel, time-separated stories. But apart from a handful of time transitions, out of hundreds, mind you, it rarely found a thematic or tonal flow, instead haphazardly jumping around its temporal story, and preventing audiences from growing to care for many, if any, of its characters. Con number 2 has gotta be the visual effects. This isn't as severe of an issue as the first con, but it's a problem that manifests in two distinct ways. Perhaps the most egregious of the two ways is with the quality of the CG. The prehistoric sequences and non-canine animals in the story are rendered creations that look conspicuously out of date. This artificiality is only compounded by the generative AI-created de-aging of Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. It's almost passable if you're not really paying attention, but they do distractingly fall into the uncanny valley. The second way the visual effects disappoint here lies with the time transitions. The static camera did require some creativity to make this interesting, but somehow a framed stepwise dissolve was the best solution they could come up with. The third con is how corny the movie is. This is certainly the least problematic of the cons, and is probably more of a mixed aspect for me, but wow does this movie lay it on thick. Robert Zemeckis' movies often simmer in warm pools of rose-tinted nostalgic sweetness, but this frequently trends towards artificially saccharine territory here. There's some overacting and some really odd line delivery at times, so when combined with the locked camera angle, the whole thing takes on a strange stage play feel to it, almost like you're watching a bizarre animatronic show at Epcot. It's syrupy, and may even draw some tears by the end, but they feel a bit artificially earned. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying here, or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy in one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them, if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give here 3 out of 5 paws. To be honest, I was and still am very torn on exactly how I feel about this film, so I wouldn't be surprised if this rating changes with time and rewatches. It's an ambitious movie with an extremely interesting, albeit gimmicky premise, but the odd structural approach, less than ideal visual effects, and over-sentimentality lessen the impact of this story about the cyclical nature of life and the passage of time. I would recommend here to people looking for a very sentimental drama about life. Many people will likely consider the movie too corny, and others will be distracted by the visual effects, but I think some people, especially older individuals, will be able to project themselves onto the story, finding moving parallels that will make them think about their own lives and families. If you liked here, I would recommend The Life of Chuck. Based on a Stephen King short story, this is a life-affirming drama that uses its unusual non-linear structure to great effect. It's sentimental without ever dipping into corny territory, and takes viewers on an emotional journey that's as wide-reaching as its life-spanning story. If you're in the mood for something a little more experimental, you might want to watch The Tree of Life. This philosophical Terrence Malick film jumps around in time to follow a family's history, while simultaneously attempting to explore the origins and meaning of life. And if you'd like to stick with some syrupy nostalgia from Robert Zemeckis, you should watch Forrest Gump. This technologically inventive comedy drama once again stars Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, following the lives of their characters through 30 years of American history. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen here? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite recent gimmick movie? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information on this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.